Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of City Century's RCC webinar series. I'm your co-host for this series, Paul Leamy, and I've been working in city law for over 25 years, the last 10 as a city firm partner practicing in the real estate sector. And I've recently taken on a voluntary role with City Century as their principal advisor and ambassador.
Hi everyone, I'm your fellow co-host Finnley Sprakes. This year in my gap year, I'm working as City Century's Engagement and Research Associate, and I'm also an aspiring solicitor apprentice looking to relocate to London from Yorkshire.
And over the course of the series so far, we've covered all stages of the solicitor apprenticeship application process, from researching and shortlisting firms to making applications and completing the online tests, right through to preparing for final in-person assessment centres. If you missed any of those episodes, they'll shortly be available in full on our City Century YouTube channel. Today's episode is really a bonus episode on the logistics of relocation to the city, which is a really important topic for both me and for the City Century team for a number of reasons. Not least because my friend and co-host Finn should be relocating to London later this year, but also ensuring that relocation is viable and that the relocation experience goes well is such an important aspect of addressing wider social mobility issues and the geographical disparities around access to opportunities in the legal profession. And RCC, really, as before, is really much your show. It's designed to answer the questions that you may have not have had the opportunity to ask at the City Century live events. And we'll endeavour to cover the questions that you've already raised in the sign-up forms, but please do pop any additional questions you have as we go along into the Q&A function.
Thanks for that, Paul. We really have got a great panel tonight. And as Paul said, this is slightly different in the way that we're going to operate tonight, but very much the same in terms of focusing on the questions that are really important to you. As Paul said, we've got the sign-up link as well. And I've taken some questions on there that we will endeavour to explore later on. So we've got Domas Gavelis, a solicitor apprentice from Hogan Lovells, who relocated from Ashford in Kent. We've got Evan Lord, a solicitor apprentice from DLA Piper, who relocated from Mansfield, Nottinghamshire. Cara from A&O Shearman, who relocated from Chorley in Lancashire. We've got Charlotte from Bird and Bird, who relocated from Liverpool. And then from Taylor Wessing, we've got Steve Burke, who not only relocated from Wales, but also is going to explore the Renters' Right Act a lot with us today and look into the details surrounding that. As always, I will say every panelist will speak from their own experience on not only relocating, but on their apprenticeship as well. So it's really important to do the research in terms of what will really work for you. If I pass back to you now, Paul.
Yeah, sure. And I think the first question, if we kick off with question one for the apprentices, um, how did you go about finding suitable accommodation within a relatively short time period between receipt of your offer and starting your apprenticeship? If I come to you first on that one, Dom.
Yeah, sure. So for me, the key was starting early, not to put an offer in, but just to get a feel for different areas in London. So over the summer in London, I went to visit quite a few parts just to see where I could actually picture myself living. Because, London varies so much in terms of commute, price, and just the general vibe of an area. And then I was also on Rightmove and Zoopla quite a lot, just saving places that I liked. And yeah, it was probably my most used app over the summer. But yeah, it helped me understand what my budget would realistically get me, what typical flats would look like, and just how quickly places disappear. And they do go fast. The flat I'm in now only came up like a week before I moved in. Another thing for anyone coming from outside London is don't rush into booking viewings until your results are confirmed. There's no point adding pressure or traveling back and forth if things aren't definite. But do have a look out for any virtual viewings because they are helpful just to get an initial sense of the property. Then once my grades were actually confirmed, I moved quite quickly. I booked viewings straight away. I checked new listings daily. And when I found something that ticked my boxes and it actually was in budget, I just put an offer in. As you know, in the London market, you don't really have the time to overthink, especially when you've got 2 weeks before your first day. And then I'd also just like to add, if relocation does feel overwhelming, just speak to your firm. They're going to offer as much support as they can. For example, at Hogan Lovells, there's another apprentice who actually moved from Wales, and he was really struggling with the time pressure. And so the firm actually helped in rearranging some temporary accommodation in central London for about a month so they could just settle in. So yeah, you don't have to feel like you're organizing everything alone. There is support from your firm if you need it.
Brilliant, thanks. And then can I come to you, Charlotte, with the same question, please, and let us know if your experience was similar to Dom's.
Yeah, so my experience was pretty similar. I tried to, like Dom said, anticipate between getting my offer and getting my results what I needed to do to get accommodation. So within that period, I was coming down to London and I was trying to book in as many flat viewings as I possibly could. Like each time I came down, because I mean it's an expensive trip to come down each time, so you've got to kind of maximize it as much as you can. Just so I could also get a feel for the area, because London is not a place that I knew at all. I think I'd been here once, maybe twice throughout my whole life to do all of the touristy sites before I moved down. So I didn't have a clue. So yeah, just tried to pack in as many viewings as I could. I think I came down maybe 2 or 3 times in between the offer and actually getting my results before I even knew whether I would 100% be moving, because whether I get the entry requirements. And I think that was one of the reasons why it kind of felt like that, is because my firm gave us offers quite late on into the year. So there was quite a limited window between getting the offer and then getting results. So it was very much just go, go, go. I then had put an offer in on a flat because, as Don was saying, the housing market in London is also bonkers and things come and go so quickly. So if you like something, you have to just have the confidence there and then to be able to say, yeah, I want it, I want to make an offer. But the letting agency that we worked with, Madison Brook, was actually really understanding of the fact that, one, me and my friend who were moving in together hadn't got our A-level results yet, and also two, that I was 17 at the time, so I actually couldn't sign a tenancy agreement. I had to wait till my 18th birthday, which was at the end of August. So we basically had the agreement in place, but didn't sign anything until we got our results. And a long story with getting a guarantor at the same time because of my age, which some summer babies will also have to deal with if they move to London. But yeah, that's basically how I ended up dealing with the process of basically the move down. I'd just say be on Rightmove as early as possible, having a little look after your offer just to get a feel. Also look at Facebook pages. There's a page called Girls Who Rent, which is really good for finding flatmates as well. And also private student accommodation is another thing that I looked at, which I'd recommend anyone to have a look at, because it's best to keep your options open.
Okay, that's great. And Evan, can we come to you now on that one?
Yeah, sure. Just to touch on what Don and Charlotte have already mentioned. The timing is tight. So, I mean, in the year that I applied, results day was on the 15th, and I think I started on the 23rd or around about that date. So that gives me 8 days from when I've been confirmed my results to getting a place, paying the deposit and the first month's rent. Obviously that requirement varies from place to place. Some might only want a week, some might want a full month. This might get touched on later. But like the timing really isn't helpful. And also with the London housing market, as Dom, I know Dom mentioned, it is fast moving. You have an eye on a place a week ago and could have been gone 2 days after, for all you know. So looking on Rightmove and Zoopla and such is useful. I got mine on Spare Room. It wasn't great. Wasn't the best place in the world. But it got me down here, and now I live in quite a nice place. So I think whatever you find in the first instance on that tight deadline, it might not be the best option out there, giving you timings. Of course, that varies from case to case. Also, just to touch on sort of like maybe the budget side of things. Again, even when you receive your contract, you probably receive your contracts not long before results day. So you've probably, even from the point that you've received your contract, you've only got 3 weeks. So yeah, we do need to be prepared as best as possible and be fast moving within the time frame that we've got. And in my experience, Spare Room is the best app to be fast moving on. And Rightmove can also be quite fussy with guarantors and your minimum and your income each month, because they'll want the rent will have to be no more than a certain percentage of your monthly income, and they can be really fussy about that. Whereas Rightmove, as it's mostly independent landlords on that app, the requirements were a little bit less strenuous. So yeah, just to round up my points, be prepared, but also be prepared to act fast.
Okay, brilliant. And Cara, coming to you, last but not least, can you kind of tell us a bit about your experience and whether it's similar to the other panelists or slightly different, given the accommodation that you're currently in?
Yeah, I took a slightly different approach when locating and sourcing my accommodation in London. Initially, I looked into student accommodations to see if there is any that would accept degree apprentices. But from my research, they don't usually tend to accept apprentices, as we don't have enough contact hours in person. So then my next step from there was researching accommodation for young professionals throughout the city in London. From that research, I found that there is quite a lot of accommodations like this. For example, the accommodation that I'm living at is accommodation for young professionals. So we have 18 to 35-year-olds who live and work in the city in central London here, and the rent is also capped at quite a reasonable amount for the location in which we live in. So I would recommend that when you are researching places to move to, not only looking at private rents, but looking at different types of accommodation as well to see where you might be accepted, because the accommodation that I live at and the other professional accommodations that I've seen is also focused quite centrally. So by looking into this accommodation, you might also be able to factor out commuting costs depending on where your office location is based.
Okay, that's great. Some really good insights there in sort of how you go about sourcing accommodation in such a short time frame. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thank you everyone for those contributions. They're really useful insights. If I come to you on this one first, Charlotte, what sort of things did you find the most challenging about relocating? What sort of aspects? I know that you've all sort of touched on your individual things, but were there any specific things other than the tight time frame that you found quite challenging about relocation?
I think the tight time frame and the cost, I think, are the main things. And like ultimately there's not a great deal that you can do about that apart from, try to plan ahead as best as possible. And also one thing that I would say was also difficult is also just understanding London. And I think that's easier for some people compared to others, depending on how much you've actually been to London as you've been growing up. But I had no idea what was a safe area, what wasn't a safe area, what was close to the office, what wasn't. Even down to things like how much the tube was going to cost me, depending on what zone of London that I lived in. But I think for anyone who is about to embark on the relocation, in order to kind of like help those worries a little bit, some things that I kind of wish I knew, and if I was going to do it again, I would be a lot more mindful before I booked viewings in a day, because it's so expensive to come down, as I touched on before, and obviously you want to make the most out of that train ticket that you've paid for. So before you're ever going to do that, go on Google Street View, look around the area on Google Maps and see if it's a dodgy area before you go and book a viewing there and spend all that money coming down to come and visit it. I made the mistake of not doing that and ended up thinking that there was a lovely apartment in Tower Hamlets for me until I got off the train and realised I was in a very dodgy area. So I'd say definitely do that. Try and get virtual viewings as well. That can also help with the difficulty of the cost of coming down for viewings all the time, and look at social media as well. I think social media is a great guideline as to what areas are safe, what areas are not so safe. You can get a really good gist of the public opinion, and that I think kind of helps a little bit with the stresses of the cost aspect and also the stresses of not understanding what areas are going to be suitable for you or not.
That's great. Thanks, Charlotte. What about you, Cara? Any other things that you found quite challenging that maybe weren't expected initially?
I'd definitely echo the sentiment about researching the areas of London in which we're looking at moving to. I found Google Maps really helpful for this because I also wasn't well acquainted with London, and looking at where my office was in comparison to the different flats and areas I was looking at to live in was really helpful in deciding how long I wanted to commute every day. A bit of an odd one, but if you are commuting from a long distance, I would consider how you're going to bring all of your belongings down. Personally, my parents are still shipping me down all of my belongings 18 months later, because I've been in this apprenticeship for almost 2 years now. So one thing I would consider is sorting out what you have and what you're going to need as a necessity, and then what can potentially be brought down later, especially if you're taking the train, because I've had to carry multiple bags on the train over multiple trips, and it was not a fun experience.
That's great. Thanks, Cara. What about you, Evan?
Yeah, so I think there's numerous challenges through actually like doing the whole relocation process. So moving from A to B, securing your apartment and stuff. But I think there's also like some more challenges that lie financially and socially. Like I think it's important to remember that you're going to a place where you most likely, in a lot of people who have relocated circumstances, do not know anyone, and that can be hard. Going, in my case, 100 and I think it's 110 miles away from my home, um, in Charlotte, and in fact, in a lot of so Charlotte and Cara's case, even further away from your home. If you don't know anyone, that can be hard, and it can also be hard for your first year, because in terms of like you can network within your cohort that spans across all the law firms in the city. Fine, you will meet people at events and such, but how people interact with each other within that cohort varies from cohort to cohort. So, I mean, in my cohort's case, we have a Thursday drinks group chat, which is usually pretty reliable if you want to go out. But like in terms of finding friends that go past Thursdays, like that can be more difficult. Um, and yeah, I feel like it's very different to your typical university social life, in like you're almost pigeonholed into it. You get stuck in a flat, in a student like flat in halls, and everyone's new there, and everyone's like in the same situation, and you all go out together and whatever, like on stupid nights like Wednesday, and like you all get to know each other that way. I feel like doing the apprenticeship's quite a different experience in that regard. Especially like me, I only did one assessment centre, so what, I knew 7 people, I think, that were potentially doing the same route. I suppose if you've done multiple assessment centres with multiple different firms, then you probably have a much wider network, and you'll probably be able to ask these questions like, are you moving? Are you relocating? Oh, do you want to share an apartment together? And I know a lot of people who have done that. But what I'm saying is it is entirely situational, and if you're in the position where you don't have many applications on the go, and you could end up with just 1 or 2 assessment centres, you don't know anyone from London, you're going down there by yourself, that's a challenge that I think you need to think about, and you need to come up with ways and mechanisms of overcoming that challenge and making life a little bit more pleasant for yourself.
Cheers, thanks for that, Evan. Finally, you, Dom, anything else to contribute to that, or do you think it's all been covered?
Yeah, I'd say the most challenging aspect for me was balancing all the trade-offs, especially in London where you really you rarely get everything in one place. There's always this balance between the cost, the commute, and just the quality of living. So you might find somewhere affordable, but it's going to be further out, which then means factoring in higher travel costs and a longer commute. Or you might find somewhere very close to the firm, which is ideal, of course, in terms of time and being in central London, but then the rent is going to be much higher. Then there's also the smaller considerations. For example, some places might technically be well connected, so like a 20-minute commute to your office, but then there's a half an hour walk from your flat to the station, which you also have to factor in. So I think that the challenge wasn't just finding accommodation for me, it's also prioritizing what matters most to you. So that would mean you have to ask yourself questions such as how long of a commute would you be comfortable with each day? What's a decent monthly budget once you factor in all the travel costs, rent, bills? What kind of space do you want to come home to after a day at work? So once you've made this plan of the type of property that you want, I think it becomes much easier to narrow down your search to this focused list. But yeah, I think initially it can feel quite intense because there's so many factors to consider. And as everyone else said, the London market does move very quickly. You might call to book a viewing just to find out the property was sold a month ago, which is something that happened to me like multiple times. But yeah, overall, I'd say the biggest challenge for me was this balancing act, figuring out what your priorities are instead of just trying to make the whole process perfect.
That's great. Thank you all for your contributions on that. I think it's really important, obviously, for our audience that not only that they're aware of the challenges, but because they're doing their research so early on, they can then prepare for those going forward. So thank you for your contributions on that. If I pass back to you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. And this one we've kind of covered a little bit. So Evan covered it slightly in his answer. So relocation, it's not just about finding accommodation, right? There's a whole host of other challenges that you have to go through. And, one of those being the social challenge, right? And making the connections and, ensuring that you have a good experience outside of work. In the environment that you're living in. And so I think my next question really is, and maybe if I can come to you first on this one, Dom, because I know that you did go to the Flat Mixer event that BPP put on in collaboration with City Sentry. And so really, I just wanted to find out a bit about how you connected with other incoming solicitor apprentices, either to find flatmates or just to build that kind of social network to make the experience a lot better. And if I can add on to that as well, the question: what do you think the industry and City Sentry and others involved could do better to make that kind of overall experience a better one?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few different ways that I connected with people. Firstly, like you mentioned, through City Sentry, they hosted this flatmate mixer, which was this event to bring incoming apprentices together who are all in the same position in terms of accommodation. So that was just the networking aspect. But then there was also a very useful presentation from the people at BPP in terms of how things like tenancies work, what landlords typically ask for, how to budget for deposits, which I think for most of us is what our sign-on bonus disappeared into. But of course, that depends on everyone. But then I'd also say you should definitely keep an eye out for events like this because I think there might be something similar which you're hosting again this year. And then to answer the second part of your question, I think just hosting more networking events in that summer. So there was the Flatmate Mixer event, which I think around 15 people attended. But I think, yeah, in that summer, a lot of people are alone. They don't really talk to people that they met at assessment centres. So just more chances and opportunities to come to London. Maybe people could split their day. Half of it could be flat viewings, and the other half could be if they're in London, if they've travelled a far distance, they could also go to the networking event that City Sentry, for example, might host. But then another way that I connected with people was through the people that I've met at Insight Days and assessment centres. That's like Evan mentioned. I think it's something that's overlooked quite often, but it's how I found my current flatmate. You spend quite intense days together during those processes, so you get to know people quite well. But after that day or two, usually those connections just fade. So I'd say the important thing is just staying in touch afterwards especially over that summer and around results day.
Brilliant.
Everyone's in the same boat, sorry. They're all trying to sort out accommodation. So, those connections, they can end up being very helpful. And then I think my last point for connecting with other apprentices is this group chat. It's a WhatsApp group chat which is called Legally Apprentice. And I think there's around 700 members. So it's the biggest solicitor apprenticeship related group chat, which I think is a really easy way to find people you might want to end up living with.
Okay, that's brilliant. And just to flag, we are currently working with BPP on a flat mixer event for June this year. So for those aspiring solicitor apprentices or existing apprentices who are thinking of relocating to London for the rest of the apprenticeship, then look out for that. It's coming up. Cara, can I come to you on that question as well, in terms of how you made connections and built your network?
Yeah, I think most of my advice will echo what has previously been said. I believe that flatmate mixes and any events put on by City Centre in order to meet apprentices from cohorts across the City of London is very useful, because you get to mix with a wide variety of people and also see if potentially you'd like to move in with someone. That's a good way to do it. I'd also recommend, as was previously said, maintaining those connections that you make at in-person insight events or assessment centres that firms host, as that's always a good way to get a feel for the type of people who might potentially be gaining offers for solicitor apprenticeships. And then you can also see how, if you want to move in with them, but also just be advised that if you can't, for whatever reason, attend these events, it's not impossible to move down to London without a flatmate. You can still do it. It's just potentially going to be a bit trickier than if you were moving in with someone else and splitting the costs for accommodation.
Okay, brilliant. And Charlotte, was yours a similar experience in terms of building that network? You're on mute, Charlotte.
On mute. Yeah, I'd say very similar experience. I think particularly when I'd already moved into London, like I've stayed with the same person that I moved in with anyway, but there are so many connections that I've made by putting myself out there, by going to all of the events that organisations like City Centre have put on, that I've now got such a wide network of friends. If, for whatever reason I ever did want to try things with a different flatmate, I've already built a huge network of potential people that I could share a flat with, which I think is great. So I think, yeah, definitely make sure that you put yourself out there and make use of all of these events that get put on to meet people. I echo what the other two guys have said before as well. When it comes to assessment centres, build those connections, keep those connections, because it's really important. That's how you make your group. And also, I know it depends on how lucky you are, because not everyone from your school might be looking at solicitor apprenticeships. No one might look at it. But how I found my current flatmate is because we both went to the same school and we were both applying for apprenticeships in London. So just throughout that process, speaking to people that are already existing connections and kind of see where they're going, because you might end up in the same place. You never know.
Sure, and it takes time, right, to build those connections and to build the network, and yeah, I think it's having a bit of patience with it as well, and recognizing that, yeah, it takes time to build the network and build the social circle that you need in order to thrive in your roles. And Evan, just coming to you on that one, and I think maybe you can tell us a bit about the working group that's been put together, and what we're looking to achieve there. In terms of addressing some of these issues around not just finding accommodation and suitable accommodation, but also, the wider aspects of relocating.
Yeah, sure. So there is a working group of around, I want to say, just over 10 solicitor apprentices that City Centre have put together. We had a meeting in December where the working group shared their concerns whilst they were relocating, and allowed City Centre to respond to those concerns, and with the help of the working group, put in a plan in place to resolve those issues. So I know Cara's also was also part of that. So I think the clear message is that City Centre and current apprentices are working to resolve these issues that have been raised on the webinar. And perhaps if work still needs to be done when people on this webinar are apprentices, then it's perhaps something that you could get involved in. But yeah, rest assured that people are working to help, and that these issues hopefully won't be as strenuous forever.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think I speak for City Centre in that we're doing all that we can to support current and future apprentices with some of the challenges that are faced and are always going to be faced when you relocate from your hometown to a new city that you might not be familiar with. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but I think we are making some good progress there in terms of facilitating building of networks and assisting with the options that are available in relation to accommodation and finding flatmates. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but I think together we can make that progress and take it forward for future generations of apprentices. And I think one of the big challenges is negotiating your tenancy agreement with your landlord. And so I think if we bring Steve in at this point to talk us through some of the new reforms that are being brought into play from 1st of May this year. So Steve, so the Renters' Rights Act, it appears to afford much greater protections to tenants. Can you talk us through some of the key reforms that apprentices should be aware of when they're entering into negotiations or agreeing terms with landlords?
Yep, sure. So broadly speaking, it's good news for people in your situation who are moving to London, trying to find some rental accommodation. So I'm just going to run through a few of the key changes. These take effect from the 1st of May this year. So there's going to be a ban on what's been called rental bidding. And what this means is that landlords or their agents won't be able to let a property to someone for a rent higher than the advertised rent. So I'm not sure if anyone has experienced a scenario where you've found somewhere that you want to move into, you make an offer at the asking price, and then you're told that someone has outbid you. So that will no longer be possible because a ceiling will be set by the rent that will be advertised. So that should provide some more clarity as to the level of rent ultimately that the landlord is expecting. There's also or there will be a prohibition on landlords accepting any advance payments at the outset of the tenancy. So again, in all tenancies, and I'm sure it's the same for tenancies that you are looking at, you could find yourself in a scenario where you've made an offer, the landlord's willing to accept the rent, but then someone emerges who's suddenly somehow able to pay 3 months rent up front, and then the landlord says, well, I'm going to go with them because I can get that money of security. So that will be banned. So you can pay the first month's rent up front, which obviously you naturally would do anyway. But that removes another potentially unfair, divisive factor of renting. And then this leads us on to the most fundamental change in that they're going to get rid of fixed term tenancies. So I imagine that most of you have been looking at or offered perhaps tenancies for a year with perhaps a right to break at 6 months, but all tenancies will become rolling tenancies on a monthly basis in most cases. So this is really helpful because I think some of you were saying that you might move into accommodation, realize it's not your forever home, let's just say, and under the old regime, you would be you tied in there to a fixed period of time. But under this new regime, as a tenant, you'll actually be able to give 2 months notice to terminate your tenancy at any time. So if you do move somewhere, and often I know what I found was that once you've moved to London, logistically it's a lot easier to get an understanding of the places and also just do more viewings because you're actually physically there. So this is really helpful because you won't be tied into long-term tenancies, and you'll have a lot more flexibility to move around. And then I suppose the other two key features are so at the moment, if your tenancy comes to an end, the landlord will ultimately say, okay, I'm going to increase the rent. And if you say no, 9 times out of 10, there'll be someone else who can afford to pay the higher rent. So they'll serve a notice to evict you. And so this is what's called a no fault eviction. So they're going, so the landlord won't be able to terminate a tenancy under that same basis. That they'll be able to terminate a tenancy if you don't pay the rent and the usual things that you would expect. But it takes away a really big negotiating chip that the landlord had to increase the rent. And then that leads us on to the final big change, which is that landlords will only be able to increase the rent once a year. And in order to do so, they can't do anything in the first year whilst you're living there. And if they want to increase the rent, they've got to give you at least 2 months notice of what they want to increase it to. And as a tenant, you'll be able to challenge that. So if you think this is ridiculous, this isn't market rate, you can actually challenge that. You can go to a tribunal, and the tribunal will determine whether the rent should be what the landlord's proposing, or if lower, the market rent. So in essence, it's a huge rebalance of the power dynamic, which is really good news for you guys because it's rebalancing it away from the landlord in favor of the tenants. So I think it's going to be really helpful. Take at least, not all, but at least some of the pressure off, because you won't be committing yourselves to potentially 1 year plus contracts. You'll have the flexibility to move around if actually that's what you decide to do.
Thanks for that, Steve. That's really useful. And myself wanting to relocate, that's really reassuring to hear that, as you say, we've got a rebalance of power, which is really, really reassuring and makes me feel a lot more confident going forward. Could I ask that you also remind us of some of the practices that were already prohibited following the introduction of the Tenant Fees Act?
Yeah, sure. So I remember when I was renting, agents could just get away with charging crazy, insane fees for what is essentially a light bit of administration. So the Tenant Fees Act fortunately put a stop to a lot of those practices. So some of the protections that came in and will continue to apply, if your landlord asks you to pay a holding deposit, so let's just say you found a property that you want to move into, but you haven't signed the tenancy agreement yet, but you want to kind of show your interest, then that's limited to being an amount equivalent to 1 week's rent, and that's refundable if the letting ultimately doesn't go ahead. Any rent deposit that you have to pay for most tenancies, it's limited to an amount that's equivalent to 5 weeks' rent. So you used to have rent deposits of 3 months' rent, really ridiculous amounts that most normal people would struggle to get together. And then, as mentioned, they banned a lot of what we'll call agency fees. So the agents used to charge for checking your references and doing a checkout and checkout cleaning, and would they actually do anything? Debatable, and they'd all be about £50 plus VAT for each one, and they'd all rack up. And then certain other fees. So if you want to assign your lease to someone else, that's now capped, so that's £50. So there are existing protections which, coupled with the new protections coming in, will create a far fairer landscape for renters.
I think
That's
that's
great.
from a cash flow perspective. The two sort of things you mentioned there that kind of jump out to me are the thing around deposits and the maximum that a landlord can require as a deposit, but also under the new Tenant Fees Act, the restriction on landlords in imposing large or requiring large chunks of rent to be paid in advance. And so going to kind of monthly rentals, it helps from a cash flow perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you for that, Steve. If I just sort of touch as well, at the beginning we were discussing your move from Cardiff. Could you just sort of summarize your experiences there for us?
Yeah, cool. So I actually grew up in Cardiff, and I moved to Bristol for university, and then I actually started my training contract at a law firm in Bristol, and it was meant to be the whole 2 years in Bristol, but for many reasons, after the first 6 months, I relocated to London, and I then for the third 6 months I moved back to Bristol, and then for the final 6 months I moved back to London, where I've remained ever since. So I definitely had more than my fair share, I think, in experience of relocating both to and from London, and I at the time I didn't have any I didn't have family who lived in London or any kind of commutable distance into London. Any friends I had in London were all already living in rented accommodation, so I didn't really have any connections that I could rely on. So my experience, especially in London, was and it's good to hear it hasn't really changed that much. Spare Room was the best website or app, I guess now, that I found, and that was mainly because the volume of available rooms, and also because it was mostly dealt with by people who were living in the houses themselves, and they were dealing with the viewings. You had a lot more traction compared to perhaps if you're dealing with an agent who's broadly speaking not as responsive as someone who's got more of a vested interest. So I'm quite pleased to hear actually that you guys have said that you've been or you know of people who've been offered support by your firms to relocate, because so my previous firm, not my current employer, just to clarify, didn't offer any assistance, financial or logistical, and all of these decisions to move back and forth were communicated with very short notice. So it was all a bit of a manic time. And obviously I'm talking about, dare I say, about 10 years or so ago, and renting has become even more competitive in the meantime. So I've definitely lived through it, and I think better times are coming with the Renters' Rights Act to at least take some of the pressure out of the situation.
That's great. Thank you for that, Steve. And I'm just going to draw on that last point that you sort of mentioned there as we come into our next section of the webinar. So as always, when we bring in our forms, myself and Paul have sat down and we've sort of gone through your key questions that you've asked, and we've collected some reoccurring themes. And just drawing on what Steve mentioned at the end there about support from firms. If I come back to the apprentices, and I'll start with yourself, Evan, if that's okay. Did your firm, or do you know of any firms that were offering any sort of financial and also practical support with the relocation and your situation of moving to the city?
So firms often offer a signing bonus. It's not specifically to relocation, but it does, when they provide you with that bonus, they will specify that its intention is to be used for relocation or buying office clothes and such. In terms of more logistical support, I was recommended a few areas, which was helpful. A lot of them were quite expensive for the salary that I was on. but yeah, they did assist in offering it, in suggesting some areas. And yeah, I think if I had any concerns, I was more than welcome to raise them internally, and the firm would do their best to look after me. But in terms of actual like grants or bonuses specifically for the purpose of relocation and nothing else, like just offered to people who are relocating, then I haven't heard of that now.
That's great. Thanks, Evan. If I come back to you on that one, Dom, this is something that you sort of brought out at the start of the webinar. What's your experience for that?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. So I know another apprentice at the firm at Hogan Lovells, Jaden, the one who moved from Wales. So he got his offers a little bit later than everyone else here at the firm. And so the firm actually paid for an apartment in central London. It was around a 5 minute walk from work. So yeah, it was a very nice studio apartment too. I think it's around £6,000 per month. So yeah, he was quite lucky. And that 1 month just gave him some more time to spend, finding spots to actually move with his own money. And then, like Evan said, the sign-on bonus of £2,000 or £3,000 that also goes on your deposit usually. I think it's usually enough, but it really depends because I know some people had support from their parents too, because some landlords also ask for like a month or 2 months in advance of rent. But yeah, and I know that in the emails when you're first being introduced to the firm, you can ask for support, and I'm sure that your firm will provide support. But personally, I didn't have any issues, but I know that firms do usually offer support if you need it.
I bet Jaden was disappointed to have to move out after his first month.
Yeah, definitely.
If I come to you on that one, Charlotte.
Yeah, sure. So, echo what has already been said. I think the main things that you tend to use for support are the sign-on bonus, which I'd say most firms do now. I've not come across specifically in my firm anything just particular to a bonus just for relocating, but everyone has that just general sign-on bonus. But I'd say for me, the biggest kind of bit of support that I got was more from a pastoral side. So like my early careers team were brilliant. Every time that I'd see them, because we had like a few chances throughout the summertime to do offer holder days, they were checking in on me about had I found a place to live, what areas was I looking at, that's a bad area, don't go there, that's a good area, look here. And they were always checking in over email, which was just really nice because it made me feel like if I did need some help and advice, I had somebody to go to. And that support has extended as I've moved flats, even since being in London. If I ever need a reference quickly, they're always brilliant at helping me quickly. So yeah, I think just for me specifically, it's been more from a pastoral way, and I've got a lot of support just based off their advice, which has been brilliant.
That's great. Thank you, Charlotte. What about you, Cara? Anything else to contribute there?
Yeah, for my firm specifically, I'd echo the pastoral support side. So one thing that my early careers HR did was set me up with apprentices in the year above me who had already relocated. So I had conversations with them about the issues they experienced where relocating, and I was warned off a few areas where I was thinking of moving, which was very helpful. One thing that my firm also did was they hold monthly calls with me to make sure that if I had any questions about relocating, I could ask them, and just to check in and make sure that I was having no issues finding a place to live. And when I had found a place to live, my firm were able to provide me support by providing me a letter stating that I had employment with them, which also stated my wage, so that I could secure the accommodation that I'm currently in.
That's great. Thank you, Cara. I'll pass back to you, Paul.
Yeah, sure. So the next question that we had in is also around kind of financial viability, and it's a bit of a hot potato, I suppose. This one, so is an apprentice salary enough to live on in London? And how do you, as apprentices, typically budget and manage the cost of living? Can I come to you first on that one, Cara?
From my personal experience, I'd say that my firm's first year salary is enough to cover the cost of living in London, but you do have to budget, especially depending on which area that you live on. So in terms of budgeting, in first year, I split it up between three factors, which was rent, food, and then commuting costs, or in my case, it was going home because I live quite close to work. So I think when you're budgeting, if you split it up into those main three key areas, and then also try to save some additional money for any extracurricular activities you want to partake in, and that would be quite useful because it's important to also have a social life outside of work.
That's great, thanks. And Charlotte, was it similar sort of experience in terms of salary levels and cost of living?
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say similar kinds of concerns when I was trying to budget with things. One point just to add, if anyone is considering relocating, especially with what Cara mentions about the tube costs, that was something that I didn't really consider, and it can actually really add up. But if you are 18, well, it was the case when I first started, which I'm in my third year now, so I'm hoping TFL still do it. You can actually get an apprentice Oyster card, which you're only allowed for the first year, but that can also help when it comes to commuting costs because it can kind of add up and it makes it a little bit cheaper for you. But I think, yeah, the first year apprenticeship wage in my firm definitely was doable, and I still was able to have a brilliant time and a great social life whilst also living in a nice area. I think it's just about being aware of how much you've got in the pot each month, and like Cara mentioned, just making sure that you're apportioning that out in the right way.
Sure, thanks for that. Dom, same for you?
Yeah, that's one of the things I mentioned earlier in relation to the balancing act of what's important to you. It's just something that you've got to consider. So would you prefer a cheaper apartment and some more spending money, or vice versa? And then the 2 or 3K sign-on bonus, like I said, that would most likely go on the deposit. And I'd say that should be more than enough, but I'm sure that your firm would be able to help out. Or I remember they also offered a 0% interest-free loan that you could take out. So I think that's something very useful that some firms offer. And to put it into perspective, as an apprentice here at Hogan Lovells, your first year salary is £30,000, and my rent currently is around 1.1k. And I think in general, I find it fine. Of course, it's going to be quite tight, especially in the first few years, but in as a year 2 or year 3 apprentice, your salary will increase. So I'm sure you'll be fine, especially once you qualify and you earn much more, then yeah, it'll be worth it. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to make, Dom, that the salaries do kind of incrementally go up each year. And so, it does become easier. Yes, rents might also go up each year, but yeah, what one would hope that the kind of as the further you get into the apprenticeship, it becomes less of a challenge in terms of finding that accommodation that's at a price that works with your salary. And Evan, coming to you on that one, any other sort of tips in terms of budgeting and managing the cost of living on an apprentice salary?
I think you're on mute, Evan.
Well, that's embarrassing. Anyway, I think on a first year apprentice salary, you might you'll be fine and you'll get by. But in terms of I like to call them fun tokens. In terms of your fun tokens, you might be a little bit limited depending on the firm. Our salary is undisclosed, so I can't really comment. But the second year, I'm much better off and have a lot more freedom to be able to do what I want. In terms of your rent, unfortunately, it is going to take up a big proportion of your monthly income. I'm talking, let's say, you're on around 28 grand a year, which is quite common. I know a lot of firms that pay that. Let's say you have £1,200 a month that needs to be rent and bills. Like that's going to leave you with around maybe £850 after tax a month. And then let's think about commuting costs, food, and then Thursday comes around and you want to go to the pub with a few mates or whatever. like the weekend comes by and you want to go home because you miss your family, or you want to go and see all your old friends and go clubbing or go watch football or whatever. It quickly adds up. It very quickly adds up. So I'm not saying that you won't be able to afford it on a first year salary. Just saying that the budgeting needs to be quite tight and rigid, and you really need to track your spending, because otherwise it's not going to go well. And I found myself not struggling for money massively, but perhaps needing to borrow a little bit of extra cash towards the end of the month from my parents or whatever, because I'd spent terribly over the month. Second year, you're absolutely fine. You should be fine. And yeah, I think having a budget and actually sticking to it is probably the solution. But I think everyone struggles with that at times. I think it's quite common to go over budget. So try your best with it. I mean, off the record and not at DLA, I'll say I know some apprentices that get like £25,000 a year. So I don't think that that's enough. If you're paying £1,200 on rent, which is quite common, I do not think that's enough.
It makes relocation a challenge.
Oh,
I agree with you.
massively. I mean, with relocation, that takes it to the point where you can move down and only afford essentials, like on that salary. Luckily, I didn't have that problem, but a lot of people do. You move down and can only afford essentials. That is a big problem that massively needs to be addressed. But yeah, in the most part, it is manageable.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Evan, for your contributions. I'm just conscious of time, and myself and Paul are really appreciative of your time. So I'll just do our last question as a sort of open one, and if you want to chip in, then that would be great. And this is sort of about the social aspect, and we've talked a little bit around group chats, organising nights out for drinks, organising social events. How do you think is best to approach this? Obviously, we've spoken about Legally Apprentice, getting involved with things like that. I also think our afternoon tea that we do at City Centre is a great opportunity to meet people on your cohort who will obviously be like-minded individuals. But are there any other things, whether it be joining something like a sports club or a running club or different things around the city that jump out to you to really help you with that social and mental and physical well-being aspect of relocation? If I open that up to anyone and you want to chip in with your opinions on that one.
I think just throwing yourself into events is the best thing that you can do from my perspective. I like when I was in my first year and City Century hosted the first event at the Law Society. Majority of the friends that I made that I have now who are apprentices, I met at that event. And I think it's brilliant now because there's more and more and more events getting put on. So you've got that opportunity to not only create those connections but keep them from like lasting and keep building upon them. So I'd say definitely throw yourself into events. External things are also great, because I think having friends who are doing the same thing that you're doing is brilliant, but sometimes it can also be good to have groups of friends everywhere. And one thing I found really helpful for that was sports clubs. So I joined a netball club, and also there is an app called Click, where there are lots and lots of different groups on that. There's like book clubs, there's different sports clubs, there's movie nights, like there's all sorts of things that you can get involved in. And I've actually met apprentices through that, even though that's not apprentice specific. So that's another good recommendation for being able to meet people in the city.
That's great. Thank you for that, Charlotte. Anyone else got any final contributions to that one?
I might just jump in if you don't mind. I'll be quick, conscious of time. I think that networking events are great, and you definitely can meet friends there. But some networking events are quite professional. So I think, like you mentioned, Finn, about the afternoon tea, that one was a good one. I met quite a few people that I speak to as friends. That's a good one to do. But in some cases, you'll turn up to a networking event and it will be quite professional and maybe not quite a friend that you go to the pub with making sort of environment. So I think networking events are sort of like, I'm trying not to do the 6-7 meme, but like they're sort of like a little bit like come and go. Is what I'm trying to say. But it definitely useful. I mean, go to them. I mean that's what you need to do. Go to them, assess the vibe. I mean, so what if they're a professional event? I mean, you're still going to meet people there. But I just thought it was something to bear in mind, and I've also noted legally apprenticed down because I had no idea that existed. So thanks, Finn.
That's great. Thank you, Evan. And I'm amazed 6-7's managed to infiltrate the webinar series as well as every other aspect of my life at the minute. But yeah, I think to touch finally on the afternoon tea, what's really interesting for me working for City Century is when I went to the afternoon tea, that was actually the first event I did while working for the company. And then we recently had our National Apprenticeship Week conference, and to see how many people had met at the afternoon tea for the first time, kept in touch, and then at the National Apprenticeship Week conference were coming in and seemed like absolute best mates, had clearly spent an awful lot of time together since then. And even myself, not as an apprentice, but as an aspiring apprentice, networking at these events. And I'm keeping in touch with people I've met at that event in September all the way now going forwards to the new year. So I think that's a really, really interesting one going forwards, and completely get what you're saying as well, Evan, about that's a little bit more of a relaxed setting. So that maybe makes it a little bit easier to have that sort of informal connection with people. So thank you all for your contributions on that. I'll pass over to you, Paul, for your closing comments.
Yeah, so I've just been scribbling a few things down as we've been going through this evening, and thank you to all of the panel for your contributions. And I think we've heard a lot today that there are inevitably challenges around relocation, but that those challenges are not insurmountable. And the City Century Working Group, the member law firms and others are collectively doing what we can to try and ensure that systems are in place or systems are improved to make relocation a more viable option, and just to make it a better experience for apprentices coming to the city from other parts of the UK. So my advice really in terms of closing comments will be to embrace those challenges and really embrace them in pursuit of your career, and don't let the geography where you were born determine your future. I'd also say reach out to existing apprentices like the ones we've had on the panel today to gain their kind of unfiltered views on relocation and how they overcome those challenges. Dom mentioned Legally Apprentice. Yeah, it's good to get on there because there you'll meet lots of apprentices who've been in a similar situation to you. And sometimes I think just talking it through and talking to people who've got lived experience of relocation and talking through how they overcame their challenges can be really, really helpful. And I suppose finally, I'd just say reach out to each other. So you're in a process, you're meeting people at assessment centres, hopefully at this time of year. So reach out to them, connect with them, stay in touch with them, and support each other as you enter into this exciting period within your journeys. And I think it can be done. The panel that we've had here today have shown that it can be done. And I think it just remains for me to say good luck with the rest of the application processes. Good luck with your assessment centres. And I hope to see some of you relocating to London later this year.
Thanks for that, Paul. I'll just pass on my massive thanks to the panel again, our apprentices, and Steve. I think you've been absolutely brilliant and provided some really, really useful insights for not only aspiring apprentices. That's something to note tonight. We've not just got aspiring apprentices on tonight, we've also got current apprentices to discuss the topic of relocation. So that's been really useful. Thank you. Our next and final Ask CC episode will be aimed at younger students who are just starting to get the ideas of solicitor apprenticeships, and that will be sometime towards the end of March or early April, and that will be targeted around sort of year 11s and year 12. So that probably won't be of interest to most of the people on tonight, but we'd really appreciate if you share those when they come out. Final thing for me to say is again to pass on my good luck going forwards for your applications, and to also thank our panel once more. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a good evening.